Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their long weekends last weekend and the slightly shorter working week. My name is Damien. I work with all of our manufacturer partners, and I will be kind of in the background moderating this week's guest webinar. We love these kinds of webinars because it provides an additional platform for communication and learning for both the designer and the manufacturer. This last year or so, we've been on a bit of a lighting development bender. So we think it's very prudent to approach these kinds of topics in this medium just to get those creative juices flowing and ready for what's coming. And broadly speaking, I think landscape lighting has been an undervalued portion of design, in these kinds of projects for a long time. I'm certainly a culprit of that. Not necessarily recognizing the importance of a really good lighting design. But I've come to understand more and more in chatting with manufacturers, the immense value in the landscape and site lighting across, all manner of scales. And I think with conversations like this, we can all learn quite a lot. So presenting today, we have Ryan Williams of FX Luminaire. FX Luminaire is a Hunter Industries company and has been around for about 30 years in its own right, and has a reputation for quality and innovation. I don't really think I need to say too much more. But before we get stuck in, let's quickly go over the usual housekeeping items. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the Q&A window. Not the chat window, the Q&A window, which can be accessed by clicking the Q&A button on your screens. Some questions will be answered directly between myself and you. Otherwise, we'll have a moment to answer those questions during a point in the presentation. And of course, we'll have some time at the very end as well for Ryan to answer these things live. But from this point, I'd like to hand over to Ryan to introduce himself and get us underway. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Damien, and thanks everybody for joining me. I have participated in a number of these webinars, both on the presenting side as well as on the listening side, and I am very much aware that that you are likely going to find yourself in one of these four different categories. And not only on a webinar standpoint, but even from the lighting knowledge and level of excitement. I'm hoping we don't have any ones already. I would be a little bit concerned about that. But it's my goal and my job to either pull you up from a 2 to a 3, or better yet, a 3 to a 4. And if I see lots of 3s and 4s by the end of this presentation, I know I'm doing my job here today. I find myself on the 4 side of these things. When it comes to lighting in general, I love lighting. Lighting is, from my perspective, is the best industry to be in because everybody needs light to see. No matter what it is, whether you're using sunlight or artificial light, you are going to need light, and that's an important part of our lives. Especially even here in California, where I'm calling from right now. In the wintertime, it gets dark around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And that means that all the hard work that many of you who are in the landscape architectural world have, all your hard work doesn't get seen. And it's really with light that we can pull out the beauty of what you've done, and even from a different perspective of that beauty at night and with the right amount of light. I am excited about this topic because I do come from FX Luminaire. I've been with FX for about 8 years. Just over now, in a number of different roles, from the engineering side to product management and the marketing side as well. So I've done a little bit of homework in this world. I do have what's called my LC credentials, which stands for Lighting Certified. It's really focuses on the commercial, both interior and exterior lighting worlds, and ensuring that we're up to date in those worlds. My passion is developing businesses and products, and I really love to do that with people who are using the product, who use it every day, and so that we can all develop these businesses and products together. My education background, for those who are any cougars on the line, I do come from Brigham Young University, where I have quite a few letters behind my name because I took a lot of school. Let's keep going here about a little bit more about what we are talking about today. So when it comes to today, in my 8 years or so that I've been doing outdoor lighting, I tend to see the same old thing. Because from a lighting design perspective, we tend to put these things on autopilot. Okay, there's a tree, it gets 1, maybe 2 lights. They're all up lights, and they're all spaced whatever distance away from the tree that's convenient for the contractor. I put my lights in certain buckets, meaning I have either a 20-watt equivalent, a 35-watt equivalent, a 50-watt equivalent. I use the same finishes, I use the same types of fixtures, and what that means is all of our lighting jobs tend to look the same. And my goal here for today, I can't give you every single tool that's available to all of us in the lighting design community, but I can give you, and I'm hoping to get you some new ideas to help you think a little bit differently about lighting and think differently about the tools that you're using for lighting, more importantly. Okay. So let's move on to a little bit about our agenda today. Our agenda is really focusing on a handful of tools, 5 specifically. And the first one's downlighting, and I'll be honest, we're going to talk more about downlighting than any other tools because there's a lot to talk about. And then we'll hit other categories like moving upstairs, changing your quantity as well as the distances, think a little bit differently, and even accessorize. But before we get into any of these agenda items, we always have to start with the same caveat of any outdoor lighting design. And that caveat is we need to first focus on the needs of the homeowners, and second, the needs of the space. When we talk about this autopilot concept, too often as designers or contractors or whatever position you hold, we step onto a job site or we see the plans and we automatically start running through the process in our mind. Okay, up lights go here, path lights go here, down lights go there. But before we even understand what the homeowners are looking for, where on the property do they actually see? Where on the property do they actually visit or interact with or want to interact more often with? It's the homeowners that we're truly trying to not only impress, but improve the quality of their life. And so we need to first start with them. Second is the needs of the space itself. Every space is unique, and no matter what our autopilot says, we do need to listen to what is capable at that site as well as necessary at that site in its various categories, from safety to accent lighting to task-oriented things, ambient lighting, those types of concepts. Okay, so again, before we do anything, we have to start with those 2 caveats because that is the most important thing that we need to keep at the top of our mind. But once we have that in our mind, we know what the needs of the homeowners are and of the site. Now it's time to start putting together what this design might look like. And as you start to put that design together, I would encourage you to first start looking at downlighting. Downlighting is the most natural form of lighting. It's the most cost efficient in terms of the product itself, maybe not labor, but from the product itself. And from my perspective, it's the most beautiful option because it's inviting and it offers a different and unique perspective than we are typically used to. When it comes to downlighting, there are really 3 main categories of fixtures that we use. The first category is, and most importantly, or most common, is directional downlights. Then we have pendants, those hanging lights, and third we have surface mounted fixtures, either on a vertical surface or a horizontal surface. Now, I mentioned directional is the most popular And because of that, there's certain features that we need to be aware of. A classic directional fixture is called directional because you can mount it in a certain position and then you can change the direction of that light. There's typically a pivot point here, and in this example, that pivot point would fall right here if you're looking at the screen itself. You always want to make sure that you have the maximum number of alignment points itself. Okay, I need to have various axes and ways to light exactly what I need to, no matter how it's mounted. And so always look for a fixture that gives you that capability. Also, always look for a directional fixture that can lock in place. These downlights are usually high above the ground. They're not always easy to access, and typically you're going to need a ladder to do so. So pick a fixture that you can lock in place and is going to stay in place, more importantly. With these fixtures that are generally high up, whether it's directional or any of the others, you want to pay attention not only to what it's lighting up and what it can do, but how to control the glare. Okay, when we talk about the glare and we kind of do some research, we find that the IES organization, who writes all of in a sense, our governing body of the industry in North America, kind of defines glare as having either too much light or an excessive contrast. And there are some key tricks that we can use to help avoid that glare. Most commonly is the shroud or cap on that fixture. And there's really 4 different types of caps that I see in the marketplace. The most common on typical fixtures is a shorter type shroud. That shorter shrouds usually sit about maybe 1 inch or so off the glass lens to give you some shrouding, not a lot, but enough to block glare in many angles or viewpoints, but really allows you to kind of maximize not only the beam angle, but the field angle, more importantly. It is very common on these directional downlights to extend that shroud a little bit longer, usually at either a 45-degree or a 60-degree angle. And I typically call those the longer shrouds. These are more popular for directional downlights because you need to block more of the light, and usually block it from multiple viewing angles. Therefore, the longer the shroud that you have, the better. But keep in mind that the longer it is, the more you're going to restrict the light, and that forces you to want to make sure that you're installing the light at a very wide angle. Okay, so, and by wide I mean about 30 degrees off of the horizontal plane. Anytime you start going lower than 30 degrees off that horizontal plane, you're focusing the light more narrowly and you're creating a tighter beam. And therefore, you're going to have these hardline circles, which gives us more glare, right? Because it's an excessive amount of contrast based on what's on the ground. And you tend to have those hardline circles. So what will even maximize that contrast is using a straight or deeper shroud. These usually have 360-degree coverage, but you're going to really want to make sure you install those a little bit higher. These are fixtures that you're going to have 15 feet or higher for sure. They're going to give you the most protection from glare, and they're going to give you usually the best looking design, but you need to plan for it. Well, how do you plan for it? You keep that angle less than 30 degrees off of the horizontal plane, and you install it more than 15 feet off the ground. That's going to give you the most glare protection. Now, by doing that, you'll likely end up having to use a few more fixtures to cover the amount of area, but it's going to be much more comfortable for the homeowners and those that viewing and including themselves in that space. The 4th option, which has the least amount of glare control, is a straight or a flat shroud. This is where that glass for the fixture comes right up to the edge. Then this is the least common fixture or cap for a downlight. And the reason is because it has the most amount of glare. Now, you will more often find this type of fixture or cap in an uplight fashion, and you're going to want to put it well above the sight of those viewing the space. Most commonly, I see this type of fixture in where I am in California. I see them in the tops of palm trees, where I can put it on a tree ring or up to the top close to the fronds, and I can back it up a little bit to light up more of the fronds. And by doing that, I am not having a shroud to cup water or collect water. So that's the most common for straight or flat shrouds. But in any case, if you do have that fixture for a downlight, you're going to want to make sure that there are no viewing angles that can possibly see that source. The one thing that I would recommend you put into any directional fixture or downlight especially is a hex baffle. That's here on the screen as well. That hex baffle with the honeycomb shape will allow you to cut down on a little bit more glare no matter what shroud you're using. So any case for downlighting, we're always going to want to make sure that we're maximizing or minimizing the amount of glare. Now, depending on the fixture you're using, we usually classify fixtures in the lighting world into two different buckets. We call them lamped fixtures or integrated LED fixtures. When you're using lamped fixtures, you do have an additional tool with reducing glare for downlights. That additional tool is changing the lamp position. There are many fixtures that will allow you to either push that lamp right up to the glass lens, which will help maximize what we call the field angle. Here's that angle right here for the field angle as opposed to the beam angle. We most often talk about beam angles because that's what's on the box. It's a 35 degree, it's a 20 degree, it's a 60 degree beam. But that's referring to the beam angle where 50% of the light is found. Another 40% will get you what we call the field angle, which is this outer line right here. The beam angle is often determined by the lamp itself. Field angle is often defined by the fixture that it is in. Okay, as you can see in this example, this shroud would block the field angle really to about this point right here. Thus restricting the field angle itself. If I were to lower that lamp deeper inside the fixture, I would restrict the field angle even more because I now have a few additional points that's cutting off the light. Again, that does not change the beam angle, it only changes the field angle. As you can tell, as you go deeper into the fixture, or if your shroud gets longer and longer, remember we talked about those straight shrouds, in that case, you could start affecting the beam angle itself or where that 50% of the light is found. So again, this is just one more tool that you can use for reducing glare in some of these directional downlights. To give you another example of what that looks like when we talk about pushing the lamp deeper in, that also allows you to have a little bit more flexibility in terms of your accessories. Okay, common accessories in a fixture such as this would include your dichroic lenses if you're changing either color temperatures or just changing the color in general. Maybe you want to switch out reds and greens for Christmas time. Dichroic lenses are a classic way to do that. Another accessory are spread lenses or spread lenses. Spread lenses is where we talk about either frosted lenses, solite spread lenses, linear spreads, just other optic options to change the direction of light, to change the softness of transitions and other things. The spread lenses are usually something that is not often considered or even thought about. My favorite is a solite spread lens, and the reason I like the solite is what it does is it allows you to preserve the beam angle, but softens the edges and softens that transition between where we see that beam angle to the field angle. And I find that just a nice touch, and I really love soft transitions, especially if I'm lighting hardscape or flat walls, as opposed to lighting up a landscape, we'll call it a feature like a tree. On a tree, you're not going to notice those transitions, so using a solite is not necessary. But anytime you're on the walls themselves, I would definitely recommend using solites. That hex baffle, which we mentioned in the previous slide, is also a great option to have. And then to push the light farther, even farther back if you'd like, they do make things like recessor rings that will just, again, allow you to push that lamp even farther back. So when we talk about examples of directional downlighting on the house specifically, here's a great example from, I think this is out in the Missouri area. Now, in this house, they're using directional lights, directional downlights to light up the entire house. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that the hotter spots right about here along the soffits themselves. And with that, you'll see a couple things. Number one, I see that the light is very soft and even going down the walls of the house. I'm also seeing a few examples where I'm lighting up the bottom on the ground itself. Now, with this concept, the sidewalks all around the house are all well lit. The shrubs are all well lit, and it's a nice, soft, and welcoming transition as people are walking around the property. Another concept of downlighting on the house itself is that it tends to ground the house. I can tell that this house is attached to the ground, and that's a comfortable view when we look at the next slide. Things you need to keep in mind about this type of or style of lighting is, number one, it's a high labor cost, right? For each of these fixtures that are attached to those soffits or fascia boards, depending on where you're installing them, someone's got to be up on a ladder and someone's got to run that wire all the way around. So that's a higher labor concept. And usually if you want to take your typical ground labor rate, you would want to multiply that by 3 or 4 to get what your downlighting labor rate is going to be. Also, again, this is downlighting, so you do want to watch the glare, but we've already taken care of that, right, with our various shroud styles as well as accessory options. So if we want to compare what this house might look like, a downlighting house versus an uplight house, let's take a look at the differences for them. Number one, you can see that I see a lot more intensity on the scallops themselves, these little rounded curves at the source of each fixture. When what that does is that puts a little bit of a higher intensity on the house itself, especially at the base. And if I were to back up, maybe go to the street level on this house, the ground would be fairly dark, and I would see the light starting in these scalloped shapes. Now, what that does is that gives the house almost an appearance of it's floating because the ground is all dark and they only see the house. So as you can see, that problem is solved when we do the downlighting option. Another thing that we're going to look at right now is you can see how well that the eaves or the soffits and the fascia board are lit on an uplighting house. But on the downlit house, those areas are very dark. So you can tell that there's a great benefit to kind of using both options together to give you the best of both worlds. So that's something I would ask you to consider, either using moving to the downlighting option or doing a little bit of both so you can highlight those various features. But keep those things in mind here. The next category of downlighting is pendants. Now, pendants tend to be more accent pieces than anything else. This is a great option if you want to save some money, because I can light a single tree, as in the example on the right, with one downlight fairly high up in the tree, and it lights up usually everything in the center, so your branching structure is covered. It creates a nice shadow experience on the ground. And it only took me one fixture to light that whole tree, with various viewing angles, as opposed to using 1, 2, 3, or even 4 fixtures for a single tree. These fixtures will also tend to move in the wind as throughout the evening. So some people enjoy that movement look and feel. Others tend to get a little bit nervous about it. So it's definitely something you want to make sure that the homeowner is aware of. But the picture itself actually shows a great example of what that can do with a single fixture. On the picture on the left, you can see that these pendants really show more the decorative option. This one has the perforated shroud option, so it becomes more of that decorative piece. But you also have to consider that the longer the shroud gets, the tighter the circle on the ground or whatever you're lighting tends to be. So as you can tell here, I have a hot spot right over the pillow areas, which was intended by the lighting designer. So there are actually 2 of them on this project for this couch itself. These pendants in general tend to be also less expensive from a fixture standpoint. They're fairly simple to make, and it's definitely a great technique to add to your lighting designs. Let's also, the other third category is more of those surface mounted fixtures. Now remember, these surface mounted fixtures can be mounted to a vertical surface on the wall or a horizontal surface up in at the ceiling or whatever pavilion or structure you're using above. Now these fixtures have a fixed position. You're going to screw it in place. It's going to be in that position and always be in that position. The key thing to remember about these is they are fixtures that are what I call visible and viewable. They're visible because you will see the fixtures both day and night. So you want to make sure the finishes and the design of the fixture kind of match the architecture that you are attaching them to from a finish standpoint as well as a design standpoint. Also in the lighting community, viewable fixtures are becoming a little bit more popular. So keep that in mind on these fixtures when you're almost intending them to see the light source itself. And so if that's the case, we want to make sure that you lower the intensity on them significantly. You make it a very soft lighting by using your spread lenses and other accessory tools. And you also want to add more of these fixtures, obviously with the less light. That'll give you a more consistent and comfortable experience for those homeowners or those that are viewing or participating in that outdoor space. When another kind of a close-up look on one of these fixtures is a version right here. Again, finishes should match as close as you can. Use hex baffles because they are downlights, and again, quantity is going to win in something like this. Another concept, so that one was more of looking from a downlighting perspective. Moving to the wall itself for another surface mount option. The classic example here are these sconce or carriage or coach lights, whatever name you want to give them. And in those cases, quite often they're going to be 120 volt input for us in the US or North America. And they tend to be larger, and we are very comfortable seeing these very bright and obnoxious lights. It's very common to have high intensity lamps inside, so that unfortunately when someone drives past the house, our eyes are going to be directed towards the brightest thing on the house, and too often that is these lights. So there are several ways to kind of correct this. Number one would be, and the easiest, is to swap out the lamps to a very low intensity lamp. That will solve that problem. That will give light for the homeowners as they need it in terms of someone's at the front door. Oftentimes what we'll find is designers will remove those coach lights from the property and replace them with lights that go well with the landscape lighting that was installed. That is the ideal scenario. That means all the lights around the property are going to match. But there's a couple things you need to keep in mind. Number one is often because your lights around the property tend to be low voltage for those in North America. And in that case, you're going to want to have a step down transformer in that junction box behind the fixture and to drop it down from 120 volts down to 12 volts. That's a fairly easy change to do, and you can find these little transformers that range in size from a small matchbox look to a slightly larger option. In most cases, they will fit in the round junction boxes that are in the wall itself, and that can solve a lot of problems for you. Another thing to keep in mind is these tend to be very close to the walls, so you want to watch what the beam patterns are going to look like on the wall itself. Now, too often, a great example would be this right here, where I found these 3 fixtures close to the wall, and I see these weird patterns on the ground or on the wall that tend to be very distracting. Now, with this distracting look, I kind of want to avoid that as much as I can. Now, it was more intentional on this fixture because they have that perforated can look. But as you look to find fixtures that look a little bit closer to what we're talking about here, keep in mind of what those patterns are going to look like on the ground, on the wall, and make sure it's an inviting and not a distracting kind of concept. Lastly, you do want to pay attention and make sure you have fixtures that have a wall plate that fits over a junction box. This will make sure that it's a clean transition, it mounts well, and it is easy for those doing installs or servicing and repairs. So just one last concept on the pendants themselves. Again, you can reduce your fixture count significantly. They tend to be decorative, and then just plan for movement for that overhead lighting. So it is about 10:30 now. We're pretty close to halfway done with the presentation already. I wanted to open it up now for any questions that have come up so far, so we can take a look at those now. Damon, do you have any? Okay, so I'm going to continue then and move on over to moving upstairs. So when it comes to moving upstairs, here's a classic look of a house. And this house has no landscape lighting. It just has the lighting on the house itself. We kind of did some various zoning techniques on the house. And as you can see, the house looks good. And a typical homeowner would look at this and go, "Wow, that looks great. I love the lights on the pillars. I love the symmetry. I love adding light to the architecture itself." And when it comes to when it comes to this look, we want to pay attention to the fact that, well, you know what, you've missed half the house. The other half of the house is upstairs. And so if I take a look at what it could look like when I add upstairs, I can really make the house pop itself. Homeowners typically love this look right here. First story, it's more light than they ever had. And in most cases, that's what we see light as. More light is better than no light itself. So this looks great, but we're missing that all too important option of adding light to the second story, which makes the entire house pop. There's so many features to the architecture that we cannot afford to skip out on the second story. When it comes to making this happen, there's a couple ways you can do it. More commonly, we think of gutter mounts. So something like this over here in the picture. Gutter mounts are fairly easy to install, and the idea is that you can hide a lot of the wires in the gutter itself. And you have contractors who have gotten pretty clever with doing installs around the gutters themselves. They're fairly easy to do, and it really makes the new thing pop, the new design pop. Number two on this concept, I'm going to go back to the last image here. I want to show you some things that we tend to see that are difficult. If you look at the light here on the second story is lit by a fixture on this category, on this corner right here, and one on the opposite corner. As you can see, in doing this, I'm lighting up the roof line itself right around the fixture, which is not ideal. We're calling attention to shingles, and that's not what we're looking for. We want them to see the second story. So whenever you're doing this, I highly recommend you put a small little riser, maybe a 4-inch riser or so, just to get the light off of the gutter and off of the roof line and focusing just on the roof itself. Remember, homeowners are not going to see any light that skips past the roof, so you're better aiming it a little bit higher than not. Another thing to keep in mind is that second story light right above the front door, that is lit not from a gutter, and it's not even on the house itself. It's actually installed into this tree. And we're lighting it using a directional uplight from the tree to light that piece. So you don't have to use the gutters. You don't have to mount to do the house itself. There are other ways that you can mount fixtures to light up these features themselves. Okay. So risers and couplings are a great way to do that. Lastly, I highly recommend, the homeowners will often say, oh, I have to paint the house before I do lighting. It's actually the opposite. I highly recommend you put in the lighting first and then paint the house. And the reason is because especially on architecturally mounted fixtures, you're going to have wires running everywhere, often through this, right around the soffits, eaves, and behind the fascia boards. And in that case, you're going to want those wires painted the same color. And so in those cases, highly recommend installing the fixtures before getting into painting.
Hey Ryan, sorry, I just realized I had a little technical difficulty on my end, so no
Sure.
one heard me speaking during that question time. I do have one question, actually, a bit more specific to the wiring on fixtures attached to the wall and how the wiring is run to the transformer.
So let's go back a couple slides here to that sconce page. So in a case like this, you have the house is running 120 behind in the house itself. There's a junction box right behind this fixture, typically a round junction box, and there's 120 coming into that junction box. If you take an example like this step-down transformer in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the white and black wires for your neutral and lines. That's connecting to the 120 of the house. The red lines are the low voltage coming out. That little step-down transformer, it tends to be fairly small, and that means you can convert any fixture really from 120 down to 12 volts.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's all for now. Sorry, I didn't want to disrupt the process too much, but yeah, I thought that one was pertinent to what you just discussed. So I wanted to get that one through.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Let's jump over here. So we have remember, moving upstairs will create the biggest difference in your lighting design. So don't forget about that. Another sense is number of fixtures, viewing angles, and distances from the trees themselves. Trees is where everybody starts with lighting. I would actually recommend the opposite. I'd recommend that they started with the house itself. But when it comes to trees, which people tend to start with, commonly contractors will put, or designers will put in one fixture, maybe two. Okay, one fixture because it's maybe a smaller tree. And the argument would be, well, I'll add more fixtures later. I would highly recommend we always start at least with two fixtures. And the reason with two fixtures is two fixtures create this cross lighting effect, which adds a second dimension to the tree or whatever you're trying to light up. A single fixture lights up from one perspective and gives you a single dimension, or we'll call it a 2D kind of look. But to add that third dimension, you need a third light or a second light to add the cross lighting. The other argument is you want to plan for multiple viewing angles. In most trees, you are going to see not only from the front or maybe the side, but we often forget about the back of the tree because of our windows. It's a great effect if you've ever done it, where you turn off all the lights inside the house and then you look outside the window and you see the landscape lighting. From that perspective, you always want to light from the perspective so that those in the house can see the lighting as well. So that would mean adding another fixture around on the opposite side of the trees or landscape. And in doing that, I would recommend that you, again, start with two, if not three fixtures. And in the case on the image on the left, you can see that we have four there. So when we talk about not quantity around the tree, we often don't pay attention to the distance from the tree. A small tree, your distance can be pretty consistent like you see on the left here. But once the trees get larger, you're not lighting the tree, you're lighting different aspects of the tree. So you need to have fixtures that are a little bit closer to the trunk to highlight that branching structure. Then you need fixtures around the perimeter of the tree to, depending on viewing angles again, to make sure that the canopy is lit well as well. In this image, we're using uplights in all the cases. As you get far enough away from the tree for these larger ones, I'd probably recommend that you're going for in grades. That makes it a lot easier to do maintenance around. You don't have to worry about weed whackers and just allow the garden crew, landscaping crew to do their job much easily. When it comes to position of the tree, not only to getting different aspects of the tree, it also can change the look as well. So in this case, from a statue or artistic piece, we know that most people will, or contractors will install that lamp or the fixture probably anywhere from 6 inches to 24 inches away from the statue itself. The farther away you move the light source, the flatter the statue is going to appear. In that case, in this image on the left, you're going to see, I start to see less of the ribs, less of the dimension of the statue. As I move closer, I tend to create what we call a grazing effect, which is going to show more texture, more dimension itself. And lastly, I can even take the light and shine behind the statue, creating that silhouette effect. So keep in mind that after you do the install, you're going to want to go back at nighttime for your nighttime adjustments to confirm that you actually installed the fixture at the right place. The best way to help your job in doing that is to use a 3-pronged spike or stick. That 3-pronged option makes it very easy to, after the installation, to pick up the fixture and move it a few inches forward, a few inches back, a few inches to the side, just to give you the right look, because you don't know that answer during the day, and you can only find that out at night. Typical stakes have barbs at the end of them, if they're good ones, to keep that fixture in the ground. If you're using the 3 prongs, it makes it a lot easier. It adds more stability for heavier fixtures, but also makes it easy to pick up a fixture out of the ground and put it in a different position for those, to create those different lighting effects that we're talking about now. Not only should you change the number of fixtures around the piece or the distance away from the piece, you can also change the various category of lights that you're using. That category in this example is a directional light versus a typical wall wash. When we talk about directionals, the beam angle on these options usually range between 10 and 60 degrees. Those are classics for options for a directional uplight. Wall washes are a little bit different. Wall washes tend to have a much wider beam angle, and in doing that, and by wider I mean between 90 and 120 degrees. So there are pros and cons to using each one, and I'm hoping that these 2 images will show us some of that. Number 2, a typical directional light tends to be a little bit high off the ground, which means light doesn't really start until the first foot or so of the trunk. So again, it can give you that floating effect of the house that we talked about earlier today. That narrow beam spread also restricts how much of the canopy you're covering, but focuses the light more so on that branching structure as we see here on the left. As we move to the right, we're using a single wall wash fixture. The wall wash fixture, this one goes to about 110 degrees. And you can see it's putting out a lot of light. So much light that the light is spilling past the tree onto the wall behind the tree, as well as onto the house itself to the left. You're getting a lot of light. The canopy is more lit, the branching structure is more lit. What we're doing is we're literally flooding this area with light, which is why these are often called floodlights. So if you need to be more purposeful on where the light is going, you should always be using directional lights. If you just need to flood a certain area, maybe because there is not a house right behind it, then floodlights or wall washes are a good way to go. Keep in mind that on the directionals, you'll often want to have more fixtures. In this example, we just had one. I would likely recommend 2 at least, and maybe a 3rd if that window has a good viewing angle there. So when it comes to this decision, it's really up to the designer what's behind, but keep in mind what you're doing with the wall washes is you're just literally flooding the area with light. When it comes to other concepts of just kind of thinking differently, here's a concept that I really liked. We did this site with a lighting designer in Arizona a month ago or so. And the problem with benches is you want to light them up, and you should light them up because we want people to understand where they should be going, what the options in this outdoor space are available to them, and we want them to go sit down and enjoy. But the only way to show them that there's the bench there is we need to light up the bench. And if you're lighting up the bench, that means when people sit down, they're going to be blinded by the light that's lighting up the bench. So I thought this was a great little trick where they put the light underneath the bench, lighting up the area that calls attention to it. It shows here is an area that I want you to be directed towards. Here's an inviting area so you can come see. And when you do so, you're not blinded by the light. So think about ways to light not only the experiences throughout the landscape, but how to help people enjoy them better. Another use of accessories, or just thinking differently, is this example here with a directional light in an accessory tube. What this does is that this helped a contractor use the same fixture throughout the property without having to change types. Directional lights tend to be a little bit less expensive than in-grades as well, and he used this tube concept to hide the fixture, provide more glare protection, and get it a little bit lower to the ground so we can start the light at the base of the tree itself. Key things you want to remember about this is in areas where it rains a lot, you want to make sure you have a significant amount of drainage. Otherwise, you're just going to fill up the entire fixture full of water. Other accessories here. Here's a great example of putting the light exactly where you need it. Many designers would take a look at this experience here on the left and say, you know what, I can't get any light there. I'm sorry. But this designer took a 24-inch riser and a coupling and raised the fixture up so he or she could light up the wall of this home from a position that was a little bit more realistic for him or her. So what we're talking about now is we've spent more time now talking about this concept of architectural lighting, not landscape lighting. And our community has for a long time focused on landscape lighting. That's what it is. But it's not just landscape lighting, and I would argue that the landscape should be secondary. Let's focus more on the architectural lighting first. Focus on the house, focus on the building, focus on the hardscape and other features throughout the outdoor living space, and then start going into the landscape itself. If you do that, you and the homeowners and those who experience the space will be much more happy with the design. It'll be more comfortable, and it'll bring more attention to the most expensive part of the area, which is the house, not necessarily the landscape itself. So let's focus less on, I'm going to go back and forth here, less on just the landscape and more on the architectural lighting itself. In doing this, we're showing off a few different things. Number one, lighting up the house. Number two, we were actually playing around with color temperatures and color matching the various trees and options throughout the landscape. So in general today, we've talked about a number of different categories. We've talked about downlighting more importantly. We've talked about moving upstairs, changing the quantity, distance, even type. I've asked you to think a little bit differently about what you're using. We even touched on some accessories. And in general, that pretty much concludes what I have here for you today. I know we've had a few more questions come in. Damien, is there anything else we want to address before we close here today?
Yeah, absolutely. Got a couple of questions. We had one person who is a bit more interested in path lighting. Is there a kind of a good technique or two that I guess can be related to what you've already shown that can be applied to, I guess a good path lighting design process?
Sure. So when we think of path lighting, we often think, okay, I have a path, so I need to use a path light. And that's not always the case, and really shouldn't be, because in order to light a path, I can light a path in a number of different ways. Yes, I can use path lights right next to the path. I can also use uplights lighting the architecture or landscape next to the path and let that residual light or reflectance kind of come back and light up the path for me. I can also light from above using downlights, which we did talk about, to light up the path again. So really there are three different ways to light up a path. Path lights, again, are the most common. They are, honestly, I'll say the easiest because they're right there, but they're also the first to be knocked over, kicked, and damaged. So I would recommend we take a look at all the different options to light a path. Again, think differently, which is part of our toolkit discussion today.
Fantastic, thank you. We had a question that kind of came in late, but was just about, does FX Luminaire have a landscape lighting design course that staff can attend or complete online?
Absolutely. I would warn you that if in order to do that, you have to listen to about 2 hours of me talking again. But we have about, I want to say it's 10 to 12 different videos that walk you through landscape lighting design. And you can access it on the website. It's also on YouTube. I'd recommend going through the website. We can give you certificates and everything if it's for staff. And by doing that, we'll walk you through all these scenarios that we talked about. And even especially one of those videos is directly related to what I just talked about path lighting. It's not just path. We don't light paths with path lights necessarily. We light paths with a variety of different of categories of light. So,
Fantastic.
yes, go to fxl.com.
Cool. I had a question about uplighting trees in containers on a vegetated roof. Bit of an interesting scenario.
Yeah, so there's a number of ways to do that. I often see people using wall lights to the side of the containers. That helps light up the pathways around the containers and draws attention to borders, allows people to see what the safety lines are and other things. But when it comes to uplights, you do have to make sure, again, you have power into those boxes themselves, which can be the tricky part if they already exist. But you can do them. It's very easy to put uplights wherever you need to. Depending on the size, again, you're going to want to pay attention to the number of fixtures, the distance away from the trees, the intensity that you're using, and other factors.
Great. And do have a couple of questions from the same user, so I'll try and ask them together. But someone was asking about hearing about lighting for under a capstone on a 3-foot stone wall, and also hearing about or learning a little bit more about in-ground lighting for a pathway.
Yeah, so regarding the capstone option, it's a very popular type of light, and you see them everywhere. The key things to remember about those is you always want to have a way to dim them down. Too often when you're talking about 3 feet of light with an LED source that close to the ground, you need to plan for there being too much light. So plan on a dimming option, and there's several of those options available on the marketplace. But plan on just dimming, because they often tend to be too bright. Again, this follows the similar mantra of outdoor lighting in general, which is more fixtures, less light. So key things to remember about those capstone fixtures: you definitely want to build them with the wall. You want to make sure that the wiring is set up through the wall as ahead of time. You want to make sure that you have a little bit of extra slack with the fixture for repairs and servicing down the road, because your wall is going to last a lot longer than fixtures will. Regarding in-ground lighting for pathway, so A common way to do that for in-grounds is to use what we call a ground wash, which is an in-ground fixture that shoots light out horizontally on the path itself. That's the most common way of using an in-ground. If there is a horizontal surface, a wall, a seat wall, anything next to the path, I'd probably recommend putting the in-grades alongside that wall, and again, letting the residual light bounce back from the wall onto the path itself. That's probably my highest recommendation there.
Fantastic. I think we've answered those questions. There was one that I wanted to ask. In the earlier stages of the presentation, when you were talking about the varying lamp placement positions and glare control options, and generally, I suppose, accessories, for those kinds of smaller, nuances of a design and in consideration, at what point of the process would a designer look to add those things to their fixtures? Is it something that needs to be considered, in the early stages, or is it an on-site consideration?
From my experience, once designers have seen the effect on that of that accessory, they tend to replicate that on all fixtures. Okay, so once they know that, okay, I see the effect of what a hex baffle will do, or I know how important a Solite lens is, once they understand that, they tend to replicate that across all the fixtures, depending on its location. But I think for most people, once they see it, they're gonna want to keep using it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's all the questions that we've had for today, and we've answered them all pretty well, I think. So guys, if anyone does have any further questions, you can feel free to email Ryan. His contact info is on the screen there, and have further discussions around some of the stuff that was talked about today. We are, of course, posting this webinar up on our website later today. So it will be there for future reference, or if you want to pass it on to anyone who missed it, wasn't able to make today's live session, you can do that. In finishing up, I just want to thank Ryan for all of his efforts in getting this presentation together, and for his time presenting to everyone today. It was a really informative and well-structured presentation, and I hope we all learned a little bit more about the value of site lighting, let's call it, as opposed to landscape lighting. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed it, and thank you for your attendance. And again, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheers.